everyone, and welcome back to the StreamTime Sports podcast. My name is Chris Stone, the community lead, joined as always by our CEO, Nick Meacham. Now, Nick, this past weekend was a big weekend individually for Rory McIlroy, and it was also apparently a big weekend for Sky Sports. If I saw correctly, it's the single largest day in Sky Sports history in terms of viewership. And I'm going to go out there and say, Nick, I was not one of those people. I didn't watch a single second of the Masters. I know I'm putting myself out there. There's people at the PGA Tour like Scott Gutterman that I really like, and I appreciate some of the work they're doing. I always find it really interesting what they're doing. But Nick mentioned it before on the podcast. I don't really watch any individual sports. So did you watch Rory's historic day? Am I the only one?
I don't know if you're the only one. I mean, and this comes back to a bigger conversation about what do you define as someone following it and watching it, right? Because people could follow a lot of the action through the app and through just social media with the near live highlights, and that might be enough for some to quote unquote follow it versus tuning in for the live experience, which is what Sky was promoting. I actually have to say my experience was pretty disastrous because I haven't really signed up to any of the local subscription platforms where, not to bore people with details, but we're renting, we've got a TV that's not ours, and they haven't got a lot of apps that aren't available on it. So we've kind of just doing a minimal standard of just one or two base layer-based platforms of like Netflix, and I think that's it, and SVT, which is the local public air BBC equivalent, let's say. And that's about it. And the Masters weren't available on those channels. And we don't even have antenna access to watch the other broadcast channels in general terms anyway. So I couldn't watch it. So then I was like trying to find how to get access. And then I think that the conclusion I came to was I have to sign up to Viaplay, who has the rights here. I believe. I have not done any research on this because I didn't know you asked me this, but I believe they have the rights to it. And when I went on there, I couldn't do it on my TV, so I was on my phone, and that was going to cost me the equivalent of about. It only gave me a monthly subscription option, I think, on my phone. Now, someone might tell me there's another way, but I didn't find that. I mean, this is thinking about the user experience thing, which I was living and breathing firsthand at the moment. And I remember last year, I really wanted to watch it, the year before that, and I watched it via the Now TV option, which is on Sky, which is you just get like a 24-hour access or a week-long access and pay a premium. It's stupidly expensive for what I wanted. It was like, I don't know, 20-something pounds, I think, for a day to watch or something like that. I'm like, I'm going to do it because I really, really want to. I had the evening cleared, nothing to annoy me. But this time around, I couldn't. I would have been up for that sort of microtransaction. I just pay a little fee for now. I still don't know if I want to sign up to Viaplay or the other big telcos in the market here. So the cable providers in the market here, or the pay TV solutions. So that left me between a rock and a hard place, and then I couldn't really find a way to get access to it there. So I was left a bit disappointed. Had all my friends who are golf fanatics texting me, "Oh, look at that! What, this is great!" And I'm like trying to find highlights, and it was a really negative experience, I have to say. So I was quite disappointed I wasn't able to get onto the platform and to watch it. So I'll hopefully be more prepared next time around.
You should have messaged our friend Magnus Svensson. He should know everything about that region. He could have helped you out, I'm sure.
I should have, but it was about 6, 7 in the evening, and I was like, at what point do you just give up? And I think this comes back to some of the stuff we're even going to touch upon a little bit today. Is this whole challenge of getting people onto platforms and not making it easy enough. Like, I'm a pretty avid fan. I kind of would have been willing to pay for it, but they haven't made it easy enough, and I'll have to commit to a long-term subscription. That's just not the ideal scenario for someone who wants to just have an events-based experience, and I would have been happy to pay a premium for it if it was offered to me. So I was a bit let down, happy for Rory. I would not have watched it to the end because I think the finishing time was the equivalent of 1:30 in the morning here because it went to playoffs. So I wouldn't have been able to watch it all through, and I would have been a bit disappointed with that. So I will live to fight another day. But this definitely, I think the Masters, I think if you ask anyone, has a very unique place in the sporting calendar for those that do follow it. So I know people that aren't golfers that will lock it in their diaries as something they'll watch hour or shot by shot for the last few hours of pretty much, well, definitely the Sunday, if not the days beforehand. So it's a very uniquely positioned event, that is for sure.
Well, not to get into the political drama between PGA Tour and Live Golf, but I saw an interesting photo. It was comparing side by side where Rory, I forget which tournament he won, but the purse was 18 million, and I believe the purse at the Masters is only 4 million. So you're talking 25, less than 25% of the. And it's just the degree of emotion, and like the point of the post was like, it's not about the paychecks, it's about the prestige of it all, and it was interesting. And like I said, to your point, like Augusta is different than the other ones, but it was interesting seeing those photos side by side. Maybe Rory had a bigger celebration and like the camera just didn't capture that particular $18 million paycheck moment, but it was interesting to your point, sort of, it's not always about the money, although we spend a lot of time talking about the money in sports.
Well, I think this is the bit that catches some people out about the majors. Is I don't believe that the Masters is officially like owned by the PGA Tour. It's its own standalone. The majors, and similar to tennis. So PGA Tour has a huge influence. I believe that I don't know, there must be some ranking points are attached to it, but I do believe there's some autonomy there in how they're operated. I'm in a pretty good position for the Masters if they can just pay what they like, and it's got so much privilege behind it that they can charge what they like, or they can give whatever they like out. And they're obviously very well known and well regarded for their, I think, talked about probably a little bit too much about the low price food and drinks and beverage and everything on site. I think they get a little bit too much coverage on that, primarily because it's impossible to get into that event. You need to know someone, you need to all pay an absolute huge gargantuan amount of money. So whilst it feels noble that the prices are lower, you try and get a ticket in there. It's one of the most prized tickets in sports. So there's a reason for that as well.
Well, the last sort of side story I'll talk about with the PGA Tour, I don't know if you're a baseball fan at all, Nick Meacham, but he was one of my idols growing up, despite his photo not being behind me on my wall of fame here. But did you see who took the photo that was going around on social media of Rory on the ground celebrating?
Yeah, I did. That was quite surreal. And did you see the final shot? Ken Griffey Jr., obviously the one you're talking about. Did you see the photo that he took at the end that got a lot of coverage on social media with Rory basically celebrating the end?
Yeah, that's the photo I'm talking about. When I saw it, I was like, what are the odds that there's another man named Ken Griffey Jr.? And then like, no shit, like it is actually the Ken Griffey Jr. that took that photo. I'm glad retirement's going well for him, but I just thought that was an incredible little side story.
What an epic pastime. He's probably got so much money in the bank, he can just choose what he wants to do. And like, you know what? I'm just going to be really good at photography and get to travel the world and he got basically a full-blown media accreditation to do it. Because I actually saw it talked about prior to the event. But this is, for those that don't know baseball, he's one of the most famous baseball names, I think. But I remember hearing of him decades ago, and his dad. I don't know what the timelines were, but also all I know is that name is very, very famous in baseball. And so for him to just pop up randomly in the crowd taking photos, ironically, no one else can take photos, remember, as well, because of the rules there that you have to put your phones away for the tournament. It's quite a cool vibe, quite a cool opportunity for him, and it clearly paid off.
Yeah, well, he's like Tiger Woods in the sense of he used to have his own video game. It was Ken Griffey Jr. On N64, so he was Tiger Woods status with his own game. And you mentioned his father. One of the fun facts is him and his father actually homered. I believe it was back to back in the same game. It's like the only time like father and son have ever done that in baseball history. His father is part of the Big Red Machine, Cincinnati Reds fan here. So Ken Griffey grew up in Cincinnati, so when he got traded to the Reds, that was one of the happiest days of my childhood.
That's quite cool.
But to your point, should have been a unanimous Hall of Famer. One person did not vote for him, which would have made him the first unanimous, but we won't get into that. But it was a cool little side story that the kind of thing sports makes happen sometimes.
You know what? I think sometimes there's always seems to be a few side stories that happen around the Masters, and I do think it's probably because there's not just a million people walking around the place with cameras out, and they look for those more unique stories than I don't know, just the sensational viral moments that probably are happening throughout the event. You could only imagine, right? But they probably don't get caught by anyone, so they have to find something else to talk about.
Well, we'll transition, Nick, into what we're going to talk about today. And you sort of kind of talked a little bit about there, kind of your struggles being able to actually tune into the Masters. And one of the things we're going to be able to do later on is we've got an interview with the CRO at the Phoenix Suns. And one of the stories that we're going to talk about there is they are one of the first teams within the NBA to set up their own D2C streaming platform. Now, this has obviously been off the back of anyone that's been following the U.S. broadcast news. There's been a lot going on with the regional sports networks. It's impacted the way teams go about doing their broadcast deals, particularly in the NBA, Major League Baseball, where unlike the NFL, there's quite a lengthy season that is not going to get picked up just by your, typical linear broadcast deals. And it's forced them to have to figure out what they need to do. And it's an interesting story, but it's also an interesting way for us to kind of go in and talk more about direct to consumer. And I suppose the thing with this, Nick, is like, it's not that direct to consumer is new, but what would you say are some of the unique challenges for launching a D2C when you are someone like the Phoenix Suns, someone, historically probably relied largely on distribution of the league deal or, just having a B2B deal with your regional sports networks and now having to do that D2C?
There's so many challenges, Chris. There's so many challenges. I think we've learned a lot over the last few years looking and following a lot of the journeys of people who are launching these types of platforms. And I mean, I could rattle off a quick few of them off the top of my head. But the first thing is the limited in audience scale, right? You've got these teams that they may have passionate fan bases, but part of the uniqueness and growth of basically professional sports in the US was built on that scale, that basically that reach through cable and other channels. They will have such a limited audience to play with. They would have to be really hyper-focused on reaching their localized audiences and trying to and spending so much time and effort in marketing that platform to fans who can't just stumble across and have access to it immediately through the traditional mediums. The other one is obviously content volume. So if you want to get people to start subscribing to these services, well, actually, depending on the rights, if it's only home games, I'm not sure the specifics on their situation, but if it's only home games, you don't make the playoffs, you're talking 40-odd games a year at best. Now, that's only for a portion of the year. So are you going to create a bespoke subscription solution, or can you monetize other ways? Because that means between games and between the season, there's nothing basically going on your platform, and how much more extra content you need to create to basically make that platform viable and worth continuing to be subscribed to. The other things are like rights limitations. Obviously, if you there's a league-wide rights deal in place, you only have certain limitations on what you can and can't do with that, and probably the different ways you can approach striking distribution deals to get more visibility. I think one of the things that is lost a lot in this industry is all about the marketing side and how tough it is to market these products and propositions. And that's why the broadcasters who've been doing it for a long time have a much more bandwidth and financial budgets basically committed to these types of things, can basically get these products out to market much, much quicker and easier than someone who's doing it from scratch. And also there's the expertise of marketing these products more effectively. And then the other things that really stand out to me are things like the technical side. You have technical infrastructure. You need to have a whole new host of basically building a tech stack largely from scratch to do these things. There's the right monetization approach. And then there's inevitably what fans are expecting from you from terms of the delivery and just what they're expecting in terms of cost-wise as well. So there's so many factors that exist that as someone going into this space has to be considerate of. It's very difficult to get the right balance from day one.
Now, speaking specifically from a monetization perspective, it used to be, and we've talked about this before, like everyone always thought subscriptions were the golden ticket. That was the thing you wanted. And there are still services out there that do on a subscription basis. You got MLB TV, the NBA, what they're doing with their app. There are subscription services out there. You've also got ad models like we're seeing introduced with FIFA Plus. You're seeing kind of mobile only deals. I'm thinking of what is that, NFL Plus, where it is a subscription deal, but it's only for streaming on mobile devices, so it comes at a much lower price point because of the restriction on where it's at. And then one of our businesses that we've worked with in the past and have highlighted before, you look at someone like a Recast. They've recently just signed a deal with NASCAR, which is around the microtransactions, buying content in smaller biteable sizes at key moments, things like that. When you're talking about balancing this up, and, we've used the Phoenix Suns as an argument, but you could use it for anyone else. If you're trying to figure out when you have such limitations around what you can and can't do, how you choose which one of those monetization models is right for you.
I just think the standard answer is there is no one monetization model, and anyone trying to do it through one single model is almost doomed for failure, or at least doomed to leave a lot of money on the table in some way, shape, or form, and to potentially let down different sets of fans. My view is, in simple, I would say, you need to have a supplementary product that is for tier one fans. And actually, I'll take a step back here. You would say there's probably two types of subscription products that exist. One is that it's targeted toward that tier one set of fans. So it's extra different tools, whether it be multi-screen, whether it's extra data access and insights and extra bespoke exclusive content, something that super serves a tier one fan that you can't and wouldn't expect from a traditional broadcaster. And there's another sort of subscription, which is where it's the kitchen sink subscription, let's call it. That's basically what a Netflix does, and also all the major streaming platforms. There's just so much critical mass on the platform at a low price. You just sort of almost can't say no to it. You just kind of have to subscribe to it. So I think you've got to look at things from that lens. So if you're launching it yourself, you can't do the kitchen sink. The kitchen sink is not viable to you. So instead, I think you have to have a subscription product that is premium with lots of cool tools and really of value to a tier one fan. So they go, yeah, that's really what I want. Then underneath that, you've got to get the right approach on looking at bringing advertising into the fore and digital sponsorships. Now we're seeing huge growth in digital sponsorships in the sponsorship industry right across the board. I think it's something like 16% growth year on year across the US sports marketplace. That's an area that has to be a continual focus point. And we talked about it before. New York, that was a huge topic, both in advertising and sponsorship. So premium top level, reduce the friction of getting onto the platform, getting access, make sure you have advertising sponsorship charged up in terms of your approach and don't treat it as a secondary thing. And then finally strike some distribution deals. See how you can get your content on other platforms that will be able to expand the reach to help you digital sponsorships, but also will be willing to maybe do rev share on some advertising they're selling on their own platforms with their established clients, or allowing you to increase exposure of your advertisers on their platforms. Or even, who knows, maybe pay a little bit of a media rights fee along the way. But if you try and monetize through one medium, like if you just go down advertising, you're leaving money on the table for those tier ones. And if you go just on unsubscription, you're leaving everything under the tier one fan off the table as a potential customer, which in this day and age is pretty mad.
And flipping things over to the technology side, and this is one of the things that Dan Costello mentioned. And like I said, Dan is the executive vice president and chief revenue officer of the Phoenix Suns. And I would say the Phoenix Suns are really interesting because their new owner is very much forward thinking and innovative and pushing them out there. But he spoke with Wim Sweldens, who's the founder and CEO at Kiswe, about the fact that they needed help. This is something that historically they did not have the internal expertise. They did not have the internal infrastructure. So to what degree, I think we take for granted some of the tech side of things, and, maybe someone like the NFL, the NBA, it's so established, it's so mature that like it's just taken for granted. But for organizations, particularly at a team level, and the Phoenix Suns aren't exactly I know the terms poverty franchise. That's how they refer to the Cincinnati Bengals, Nick. They're not a small club. They're not in a tier 2 sports league. They're one of the, second, third biggest league in the world. It's not that they don't have access to certain things, but this will also be a challenge smaller, tier 2, tier 3 football clubs in Europe may have. What role do those technology players play for those businesses that simply just don't have the expertise, the infrastructure to do it themselves?
There has been so many examples of where sports teams and lower tier leagues and competitions have tried to do it themselves. And they're people typically who have not had the nearly any experience in the broadcast or OTT or DTC space and have been tasked to work it out. And they're really smart people, but you just can't pull that off. It's way too complex a situation when you've got to add both that complexity around the monetization approach, the marketing approach, and then this technical side, which, as we see, even for people that have been established in the market for years and years, is something you have to be constantly focused on getting the technology right, evolving it, improving it, making sure you pick the right tech partners is so critical. If you pick the one, they can just let everything else down in the mix. And sometimes you can partner with certain organizations who can do it all for you, and then there's a different commercial approach. I don't think there's one right way to do it, but there's one wrong way, and that's to try and do it all yourself. That is just going to be long-winded, create lots of pain points, and will leave you'll get caught out somewhere along the way. So you have to start trusting. You have to find the right partner to trust and right partners to trust, I should say. And there's loads of people who are both independent or tech providers and solution providers and platform providers. Let's say like your Endeavor Streamings or your Kisways or your View Lifts or Delta Trays and so on and so forth, and Acedos, etc. That's their bag, is to help do this. And they all have different levels and ways of approaching it, and some things they do and some things they don't do. But you can't do it without talking to someone like a Kiswe, who we were going to hear from, who's been able to help someone like the Phoenix Suns successfully launch the right approach. So yeah, it's super important that you bring the right person on board, the right company on board to help you.
And that'll lead us nicely into that interview. Like I said, Dan from the Phoenix Suns is going to take you a little bit through their story in terms of, kind of how that all played out as the RSN market started to collapse. Because I think that is, you got to understand why these companies are making these decisions, and they have a unique story as to why they were sort of put in that position. Because what people may not know from a local team perspective, they do rely on those RSN broadcast deals. Those are a major part of their revenue play. So when that gets pulled away, that does create a bit of a vacuum. So there is a strong necessity to try to do that. So for them, like similar stories we've heard over the years, like this was something they had to do to stay competitive. So he breaks down a little bit what's happened in the regional sports network that drove them to get to this point. And then he also talks about what you just mentioned there, Nick, like we simply did not have the expertise to do that. And Wim from, Kiswe, who I misspoke earlier, he's the co-founder and the CMO, not the CEO, but CMO nonetheless, and co-founder, talking about how they came in to provide that security to help them be able to get that off the ground on a relatively short notice. So it's a really interesting case study, an example of going D2C in the manner in which they had to go about doing it.
Yeah, a super interesting story. I think it's one of the most interesting ones actually to follow in the entire industry because of the predicament you talked about that transition from this RSN powered and funded world that they lived in to now having to find a way to shift as quickly as possible, customers, consumers, and the whole internal approach around it. So I think it is really, really an interesting conversation discussion, and they go into it in quite a lot of detail. I would say, for sometimes it's a good reminder for context for those that are outside the US on how significant this regional sports network is. In some states, like I don't know what it is in California, but it's like 50 million people live in the state, right? That's as big as England in terms of size and scale. So think about the importance of that, getting that regional bit right. If you're trying to super serve a super fan base because that's your local market, and they're willing to, and they've been consuming this stuff for a long time, they have high expectations, and it's been highly lucrative for them. But they have to go through and stomach a very big transition with some cost limitations to it. And I think the MLB example is a really interesting one, when some of those clubs have been through a similar journey, and the actual league had to help fund them through that, or sort of bridge them through some of that transition. So this whole space is super interesting, and I'm still always trying to get to grips with it because it's there's so many different examples and moving parts in the space.
So we'll go ahead and hand things over to Steve McCaskill, our technology editor, who handles that interview with Dan and Wim. But we appreciate you for joining us. And by the time you hear this, you'll have just come off your Easter holidays. I hope you all had lots of chocolate, lots of fun with the kids, Easter egg hunts, and all that fun stuff. We hope you're enjoying this episode of StreamTime Sports. But we at Sports Pro are excited to announce that at the end of this month, we'll be welcoming over 1,000 top executives from across the industry to our flagship event, Sports Pro Live, held here in London at the Kia Oval. Join us on the 29th and 30th of April as we explore the future of the sports industry across vital topics, including sponsorship, media, tech, and women's sports. Head to our website, live.sportspro.com, to check out the agendas, speakers, ticket options, and more. As a podcast listener, you can also enjoy 15% off your conference pass with the code POD15, that is POD15, at checkout. We'll see you there.
Hello, I'm Steve McCaskill. I'm technology editor at Sports Pro, and I'm here at Sports Pro New York to talk about direct consumer streaming. I'm joined by Dan Costello from the Phoenix Suns and Wim from Kiswe. Please, gentlemen, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Dan Costello. I'm Executive Vice President and Chief Revenue Officer for the Phoenix Suns and Phoenix Mercury.
Yes, and my name is Wim Sweldens. I am the co-founder and today Chief Marketing Officer for Kiswe.
So you two entered into a partnership, a year or two into it now, and it was quite groundbreaking in terms of the structure that you decided upon in terms of taking, Suns games have been on cable since 1981, adapting to the times by taking both the Suns and Mercury from the Women's National Basketball Association, taking a combination of DTC and free-to-air. Can you explain why you chose to go down this path and how this partnership came about? What were you looking for in a partner?
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time, probably 15 months, 18 months, before our RSN deal was scheduled to complete, kind of looking at the landscape. And obviously, if I go back to those moments, there was a lot of challenges in the financial markets in the RSN environment. And so knowing our deal was up, we had to go through a specific process. And we were the first team to really break through, break free from the RSN environment, which was a great partnership for a number of years. But when you go on your sales floor and you go talk to fans and you realize like even your own team members at times aren't figuring out they can't figure out how to watch our games. They're not paying for bundles. They're not, integrated in traditional cable programming. And so for us, we kind of became focused on this idea of, can we be all things to everyone with an offering that we thought was really unique, focused on over the air and a really dedicated futuristic D2C platform with our friends at Kiswe.
Yeah, and it goes back a little bit to the founding days of the company. When we founded the company, we always felt that something was about to change in how sports fans watch their favorite teams, and that the traditional cable model wouldn't continue as it was. I saw at the time my kids were teenagers and they didn't really watch TV anymore. So we felt that there would be an opportunity, and then it came 2 years ago when we first partnered with the Sun, and the cable, the RSN model started to break down, and people no longer watch on cable. And so we then came up with a pretty innovative partnership between us and the NBA and Gray to sort of make sure we reach all the fans. And it's something that we always wanted to do when we started the company.
Yeah, we'll talk a bit more about streaming in a second, but I'd like to hear a bit more about the free-to-air component on Gray and why you decided that making your game, some of your games available and to the widest available audience was the best move. And I know, we're talking about the decline of paid TV households and the impact that's on the cable model. To go over the air again, that was quite something. I mean, as a Brit, the concept of teams giving away aerials to receive matches was a bit of a throwback for us because we all have aerials. Obviously, it's not the case in the US. So tell me a bit about the free to air. Why you felt that was so important to this overall strategy.
Yeah, listen, exposing as many people possible to your product, we view as a really great thing, and I think for us, it was also a moment of time, Matt Ishbia had just bought the franchise. I think Matt, as the youngest owner in sports, is really focused on, if you do right by the fan base, the financial aspects of a partnership can come. And I think for us, we've also been a team that's always sold the inventory inside of our games. So we've had this team on my revenue side that's really good at selling, television advertising and entitlements. And, when you look at going over the air, you're also looking at creating a much larger audience. And so that first year we grew over 100% in terms of our ratings. And, that's math. We can sell the advertising revenue for more. Our partners also, our brand partners, have this incredible thirst to get in front of our fan base also. And so, the combination of, our partners who want to reach a larger audience and a marketplace that's growing quickly. Phoenix is the 5th largest city in the country. Having access to these games becomes a really interesting opportunity for us. It's on us to figure out the monetization strategy. But again, that's why it's such a luxury to be able to just think about audience growth. And I think between the over-the-air strategy, combined with a really unique D2C platform, we do have an offering for everyone in our marketplace. But that over-the-air strategy has been really unique and a great way for us to talk to the fans all day. If you're in Phoenix watching the early morning news on Gray Television, our partner, the broadcast starts off with a countdown clock to our games in the news. And all day long, they're talking about our game. That type of partnership is valuable. When you're trying to promote your products, you're trying to get people to know the spirit of your teams. It's been a great partnership.
Yeah, and we obviously are the streaming component in this thing, but we're very comfortable with this sort of beam and stream a model. It feels a little bit like you said, like Back to the Future, but it's all about what Dan said, it's to make sure that you reach all the fans. There's different viewing patterns, there's different demographics. There are people who are more comfortable with an over-the-air type viewing over more traditional viewing, but clearly a younger generation is more digitally savvy or is more mobile savvy. And then we always feel as a streaming company, our job is to not sort of replicate an over-the-air experiences, but to really create a new experience that is more interactive, where people can participate, where they can chat, where there's additional behind-the-scenes content that is completely branded by the team, that gives the team a lot of insights and data on the user so we can serve them better. So it's a comfortable model as part of the transition that the industry is going through.
Obviously, we discussed the cable model, and that was a very successful model for many years. It was also, a very, very different model to what you do now. And so, be honest, before you went down this route, how much did you know about the ins and outs of the streaming market? What, obviously, there's just I think we all understand the distribution elements of it, but it's more than that. It can't just be taking linear distribution and digitally, taking it to digital environment. So what were your priorities? What did you want to make sure that you were doing? And then how important was it to make sure you had the right support?
Listen, I think anybody who says they had it figured out before you start, these are the early days. And I think, we're really grateful that we have great resources at the NBA who's been in this business. I think League Pass and the way that they've partnered in the national side of the game has been, a great partnership. So I think so highly of Bill Koenig and David Denenberg. They were by our side the entire time. We also had support from Endeavor, Karen Brocken, Hillary Mandel. We wanted to surround ourselves with a great group of people to help us evaluate and make the right decision. At the end of the day, we felt like the combination of Gray and Kiswe was the perfect combination for us. And a lot of that spirit's built on the willingness to try new things, the willingness to think bigger, think long-term. Finding the right partners that have the fortitude to think really long-term and not be so consumed with next month or next quarter. These are really long-term strategies that, if you're just focused on just the pure revenue aspects of it every day, every month, I think it's way too early to be focused on that. So I think our wins, maybe happen in 24 months, 36 months. But honestly, if we can get insights and data every day that help make better decisions for the next day, we feel great. And that one-to-one relationship with the fan, you just can't replace it. And so, I think for us, surrounding yourself with the right people, but also finding the right like-minded partners with Paramount.
Yeah, and maybe one thing to add to that. So we're obviously have a fair amount of streaming experience. We launched this company with a goal to sort of really be the DTC partner for sports teams and leagues. That market took a little bit longer to develop than we thought it would. But then one thing that we were able to do also during COVID is to really go into other verticals. I mean, we did a lot of things with music streaming during COVID. We did a lot of K-pop. We still do a lot of K-pop. We do a lot of sort of creators and influencers. And it allows us to learn a lot about the younger demographic. How do they want to engage? How do you reach them? How do you market them? How do you make them part of the stream? And it's all about, like Dan said, that one-to-one connection. Because ultimately, streaming is a one-to-one medium. It's an interactive medium. It's a bi-directional thing. It's not just about bringing the game to the remote fans. How do you make the fans, in a way, feel that they are part of the game? Just like the people who are in the arena, they feel they're part of the game. How do you bring that same feeling to fans at home? And because we are sort of in different verticals, music and creators and influencers, it allows us to sort of explore different technologies and then make sure that we take the best ones and we bring them to the partnership with the Suns.
Yeah, Dan, I think that the data point is actually something that gets lost for a lot of casual observers, how important it is to, there's that level of insight you can get on the fan, which, can have a benefit on the organization in different ways, and is something you just can't get on the linear front. Wim, you mentioned that you thought this market wouldn't develop as quickly as you thought it might. And again, you were both one of the first to do this, and doing it from a position of strength as well. As relative first movers in this market, or one of the first movers in this market, What learnings have you taken from this? Is there anything that you wish you did differently, or anything that you can take to other clients in the future? And Dan, similarly, is there anything that you've learned that you would, you now know better, or you were happy that you did, Wim?
Yeah, so a couple of things that we learned, and sometimes, as an entrepreneurial company, you don't know what the future is going to be. We had no idea, obviously, that the lockdown was coming, and at first it was an enormous challenge for us. But then we realized, for example, that some of the interactive features, like we built an interactive feature where fans could pick their own camera. And it turns out that became overnight super popular in the K-pop genre. Now, I'd be the first to admit we didn't really know much about K-pop. We worked with a bunch of the Korean bands. We got to work with BTS, and we realized that the fans really wanted that one-on-one customization. And so there was the ability to learn and quickly react to the opportunities that we had. And the other thing we realized, like you were just talking to, that insight in terms of the fan demographic, the fan usage, the fan interactivity, and making the fans feel part of the game. So we built fan walls and cheer maps, and there's sort of a lot of innovation that happened. And as we are sort of in this entrepreneurial mode together, we are constantly, like Dan said, learning, getting the data, see how we can engage the fans, and see how we can grow the opportunity.
I don't know if I do anything differently, to be candid. I mean, I think we went into this with a feeling of, we're not certain where this goes, but we know it's correct. And I think for us, the intention, if anything, would be, how do I plan for more experimentation? How do I plan for more, A/B testing? How do I plan for crazy ideas? I mean, I am also really focused, and our team's really focused on this idea of how powerful creators can be, and utilizing this DTC environment to maybe introduce different demographics that aren't sports fans. Like, I'm really interested in K-pop and the cross-cultural opportunities in pop culture that can happen when you introduce maybe a WNBA broadcast to that audience. I'm interested in, a DTC environment maybe that's focused on food and cooking. Obviously, if you look at behind the scenes during our games, there's a lot of food, there's a lot of cooking, there's a lot of cross-collaborative things that happen when you go to a game that maybe an audience that's not thinking about basketball might be interested in. And so, I want to constantly, and our team is always thinking about, how do we introduce new demographics, completely new audiences into our game. And I think, we have to continue to think about stunning and talking about our games from a different perspective, not just a super basketball fan. And, there's a lot of ways to capture our content, in X, on Snapchat, on Instagram. Meta has a number of different products. I think we're going to constantly focus our efforts on trying to differentiate what we're doing D2C wise versus everything else that's out there. And so, if anything, I'd probably overcommit to experimenting, and making sure that I'm screwing up as much as possible. Because if I'm making mistakes, it means that I'm trying. If it's perfect every time, I don't think this is the right product for that type of team.
Fail fast, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And Wim, don't put yourself down. I can guarantee you know the most about K-pop of anyone who's appeared on StreamTime Sports. So you can take that away. But further, on a more serious note, that's absolutely the way we're seeing content going. It's not just about the game. It's about lifestyle. It's about building on those stories that younger fans especially want. So you've touched upon a couple of the content and technological features that you've integrated into the D2C platform, but what did you absolutely want to have in there to maximize the engagement and the monetization opportunities? What was it that you felt would really appeal to fans and offer something completely new? What did you think that absolutely had to be in there?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the technology behind it, and I'll let Dan fill in with the content. Like, one thing that you see if you go to Suns Live, you can obviously see the games, and they're obviously behind the paywall, but you can also see the archive games. You can also see extra behind the scenes content. And what we find, if we look at the analytics behind, is that fans come back much more regularly than there are games, because they are hungry for that behind the scenes capability. So the ability to do live engagement, but then also having archive games and then snippets from players or coaches or behind the scenes type thing is definitely something that the platform does. The other thing we really enjoy is the fact that people can actually chat. There's actually ability to chat and cheer and interact with each other. And there's always people chatting, and there's always quite a few people who should like watch the chat. I mean, they don't necessarily chat themselves, but they like to see some of the commentary behind it. We obviously do some moderation behind it to make sure it's all safe. But what we also notice from the analytics is that, and we see this with the Suns and with lots of other content partners, that people who engage, they actually tend to stay longer. We're very happy with the viewing times that we're getting. They tend to come back. They tend to bring their friends. They tend to tell their friends about it. So it's sort of a virtuous cycle that happens with the technology that is very different from what a traditional, let's say, TV experience would be.
I don't have much more to add, but I do think, the only thing I'll add is probably just a different word to describe what we really love to see from a product perspective. It's just, it builds community. When you have a like-minded group of people that are watching the game, the excitement that happens when you go on a big run or there's a great play is equal to when the team's having a hard time. The passion that fandom brings is kind of the point that brings us all together. And, I think as funny it is this one-on-one relationship in D2C, this product brings people together. You can watch it with people that are, sharing an experience at the same time, and they enjoy sharing. And so I really love the community aspect of chats and, bringing people together. I think it's a game changer in terms of creating, a really unique community amongst your fan base.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Wim, for your insights.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Now, before you go, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate and review and just let me know what you think on social. You can find me on most social platforms as SportsProNick. And please do spread the word of the podcast. There's no better way of marketing than word of mouth, whether that be in person or on social media. And if you don't like what you've heard, or you think we should be doing more or less of something, then reach out and let me know, as I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, StreamTimers. Until next time.